Hi guys, welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. I'm your host Maureen, and we are here again with our resident co-host Janice. And today we are talking Sidney and Charlotte, their relationship together, and just the two of them. So let's dig right into Sidney and Charlotte.
Sounds good. So I really appreciated what Rose Williams said when she was interviewed, and she talked about the fact that she felt like their two characters learned a lot about themselves through each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so Charlotte learned a lot about who she was from her relationship with Sidney, and Sidney learned a lot about who he was through his relationship with Charlotte, which I think, we see a more dramatic change on his part.
Yeah.
In terms of who he is or who he portrays himself to be.
Yeah, I think we can see it better in him, but I think that's completely accurate, because even when it comes to, we talked last week about Charlotte's character, and even when it comes to like her naivete, Sidney is the one who brings that out in her and who shows her, these things aren't what you think they are. And so it's more subtle in her, but she becomes more worldly in a good way because of Sidney and because of the knowledge that he has. Because as much as we love Sidney and as much as we can see that, I mean, I don't think he likes himself for the greater part of this series. I don't think he likes himself, and I don't think he trusts other people.
No, not for easily the first half. And maybe that's why I like episodes 5 through 8 best, because he changes during the course of that time.
Yeah. I'd say even from episode 3 on, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but there's a little crash there in episode 4. But yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree. So yeah, it is interesting that their first introduction, how
you made.
Yeah. On the cliff sides. Yeah, the cliff sides is the beginning and the end, isn't it?
But I think, though, that I don't think he really thought that was her new maid. If you can, and again, this is conjecture because I know it's script. That's what he says. I know that it's whatever. But when he says that, he also can't take his eyes off of her.
Right.
And I think that it's ingrained in him that there's danger. Whenever you find someone too attractive, whenever you really have this instinct to be with a woman, you need to pull back. And I think that's why he says new maid, is I think his intention is to offend her so that there's no possibility of anything. Because you'd feel that connection right away, I think. Isn't there an interview with Theo James where he says that he thinks that he started to fall in love with her right from the very first moment?
Yes, he does. Yeah, that's right. He said that in one of the interviews, that he thinks that he's reacting because he is attracted to her.
Yeah.
So otherwise he might have just waited to be introduced if,
Exactly.
And I think the reason why he says Miss and she says Heywood is because he wants to hear her voice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Because he knows her name.
Yeah. He is no dummy. He's very quick and very observant, even when you don't think he's being that way.
Yeah. And
so, yeah.
I think that's where people draw the comparison with Mr. Darcy. At least that's where I see the comparison to Mr. Darcy, is that Darcy, and I'm sorry I'm talking about this again, but you know what? It's Jane Austen, so it's all the same thing. Not ish, but you know what I mean. But
no, it's fine. I love Mr. Darcy, so I'm good with it.
Darcy watched Elizabeth everywhere she went. He was drawn to her. She is so much so that, and he hit it so well that she thought he hated her because he was rude to her. He was disingenuous, it seemed. He ignored her. He tried to avoid her, but even though she thought he was trying to avoid her, he was actually going wherever she went. And that's kind of like Sidney, where I think he was a little bit better at, you know what, I'm going to stay away. But I think it's because Sidney, and I think that's where the comparison sort of deviates, is because Sidney was well aware that to not have attraction to someone or not stay with someone, you need to stay away from them, because he had that before with Eliza and it broke him. So he knew exactly what to avoid. Avoid feeling that way.
Yeah, he comes from a very different place than Mr. Darcy.
Yeah.
Mr. Darcy is shy.
Yes.
And
I love that.
And not very, even though he comes across as very stuck up, and he's not very confident actually.
Mhm.
And whereas Sidney's thing is not confidence, it's that he is really wounded.
Yep. It's
He's
armor.
very, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's intentional that he puts it on all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, he feels like he has to. And
Mhm.
she describes it as keeping the world at arm's length.
Yep.
And it's true, but it's emotional armor that he puts on.
Mhm. And I
Yeah.
think that moment in the carriage is really sweet when they're in London in episode 6, and she says that to him, and she said, "I'd rather be naive than insensible of feeling."
Right.
And he actually, for a moment, let it down and said, "Is that really what you think of me?" And then, like, when he says that, even now when I just repeated that, like, my heart just kind of drops and I want to cry. I feel so bad for him in that moment. I feel such
Yes.
compassion for him. And I think Charlotte does too, because you look at her face and she
And
knows that she's just hit a mark that she didn't mean to hit.
well, and she hammers away at him. And, I mean, the truth of the matter is they're so truthful to each other in that carriage,
Mm-hmm.
and they find out so much about each other in that carriage,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to back us up just a little bit though,
Yeah, absolutely.
as we talk about the relationship. So of course we know what happens in the first episode at that ball when he she goes up and joins him in the balcony, and he says, "A penny for your thoughts," and then she shares them and he just knocks her down, and her observances, I think, hit too close to home.
Absolutely.
And so he just knocks her back. And again, just the look on their faces, the acting involved is so incredible. You just buy these characters
Yes.
from the very beginning. I mean, they are who they present themselves to be in those moments. And yeah, so, and then the next morning, when it's Charlotte meets him on the street, sees him on the street and tries to apologize. And he is so offensive again, and again, I think the armor is just really, really up.
But in
And
that moment, though, when he's that offensive, you see him take a deep breath before he starts talking. And you see the expression on his face is different than right before he starts talking, he's got one expression on his face. He takes a deep breath, and then you can see it shut down as soon as he starts talking. So he alters everything about himself. His body language, his expression, the tone of his voice even is different when he starts talking to her again. And so you know that he didn't want to say those things to her because he feels this connection to her, but he felt it necessary to say these things to her.
It's this inward tug,
yes, he felt a very real danger there.
Mm-hmm. And the best line, and the one that really sets him back on his feet, is when she says, "Only if you don't care, I wonder that you take the trouble to be quite so offensive and hurtful." And it's so true. It's like, if you really don't care, you would just slough somebody off. You wouldn't give them the time of day, much less tell them you don't care what they think.
Yep. And I think the reason that he has that expression on his face when he left is because she's the first person to see through all that garbage. What she's saying to him is yes, she's saying what she's saying, but she's also saying, you do care. You need to recognize you care, because everyone can see that this is just something you're doing and you're harming yourself more than anybody else. And I think so even in that statement, I think she was being compassionate. Yes, she was ticked off. He hurt her, he offended her, but she's also pointing out to him, you're doing yourself more damage than anybody else.
Yes. And you can also just tell in that moment that his relationships with other women are surface.
Yeah.
There's nothing, and she isn't settling for that. She's not, it's like you said, when we talked about Charlotte's character before, she really appreciates you when you're genuine with her, whatever that is, and he's not being genuine. And my favorite, I love the look on his face as she walks away. And of course, the look on her face is she is pissed. She is angry. I love that.
I love it, angry Charlotte.
And then when they are at the luncheon, and you can tell she doesn't really want to sit next to him, but there she is, right?
Yep.
And then he starts asking her opinion again, and you can just see her hackles go up like, wait a minute, this is where we started before. And look how that turned out,
Yeah.
I've received 2 tongue lashings from you, and I don't know
court a third. I won't court a third. Isn't that what she says?
Exactly. That's exactly what she says. You've got it right. And he's like, well, she says, why not be civil? And he says, well, maybe I will. And she's like, she's done with him. And she turns and starts talking to Crow, which is, and in the book, it talks a little bit more about their conversation, but I'm sure there's just no way for them to fit all of that into these shows.
Need to get that book.
Yeah.
I just ordered so bad. Every time you talk about it, I'm like, oh man, I need that. And you sent me the link, and I was on Amazon last night. I couldn't remember the name of it. And then I just remembered when we were talking about Charlotte that you sent me the link for the book. So I got to get it.
I just loaded it on Kindle. And it's great because I'm finally fitting it in, because I have the app on my phone and on my iPad and on my computer. So wherever I am. And the great thing about that is you don't even have to use a bookmark. It keeps track of where you were last reading.
Exactly.
No matter where you are, which is wonderful.
And I think too that with Charlotte, like in that moment at that luncheon, the pineapple luncheon, I think she wants, I don't even know if that she wants to be done with him. I think she feels that it's necessary for her to not give him more to mock her with. But I think if we would have stayed the course with that, and Sidney wouldn't have sought her out, but she saw him in pain, I think she would have raced to help him.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think that on her, and that's not just, that goes beyond, yes, Charlotte helps anyone in pain, but I think in Sidney's case, it would be because she feels the same way Sidney does from the very beginning.
Oh yeah, she's quite intrigued.
I think too, going back to that first ball scene, I love the expression on Sidney's face when he's introducing them to Crow and Babington, because the only one he really looks at is Charlotte. He looks at his 2 friends and he looks at Charlotte. He doesn't really look at Esther. He doesn't really look at Claire. He just looks at Charlotte. And then in the end, when he's kind of gauging her, I think, like at first I was like, wow, that's super rude. Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you do that? But I think part of it is that he's gauging whether or not it's safe enough to dance with her, because he obviously feels that connection. He obviously feels that attraction. I think for him, it's not so much a staring at her trying to see if she's worth his time, but I think it's him watching her thinking, can I handle what this is going to bring?
And then in that episode, when they are dancing and she is talking about how it affects Tom and Sanditon, and she's gauging whether he is really interested in supporting his brother, in that conversation, that is also too close to home for him. It's like, we've talked before about how he kind of sees her as a little bit of an interloper, into his family. And now she has all these insights. And so he's like, I don't know, and he takes the first opportunity when the dancing stops and he has to go deal with Georgiana, that, he pulls away from her.
Yeah. I think I see that scene just a little bit differently. I think that while she's trying to talk to him about Tom and how he feels about Tom, I think she's more trying to figure Sidney out.
Oh yeah, right. I think you're right.
And I think he is more, I don't think at that point, I don't think he ever really truly sees her as an interloper. I think that he sees her, I think he would describe her as that because he feels that she's connecting too closely with him, and that she's reading too closely into who he is, and she's understanding who he is. And he's not okay with that, because he doesn't want anyone to see who he really is, because that's danger. But right. I think in that scene, when she says, and you can kind of see it in his expression, how his body kind of reacts to it, when she says, how does she word it? When she says something along the lines of, oh my gosh, I can't remember the exact line. When she says,
are you talking about when they're dancing?
Yeah.
And she says that if,
and you care about that.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
and
what
you
she
care
says.
about those things.
Yeah, that's what it is. And you
Yeah.
care about those things. And then he kind of goes, yes. But I mean, he says more than that, but just the way his body kind of cocks
I
back
do
a
for
little
my
bit. What?
right. I do for my brother's sake.
Yes.
He says, I do for my brother's sake. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think for him, that's
So-
shocking because he was expecting her to be just like every other woman he met. And at that moment, when he's watching her trying to figure him out, she doesn't care about who he is. She doesn't care about his money or anything else at that moment, like the other women who fawn over him do. She cares about what his brother cares about, and she cares about how he views his family. And I think for him, that was like,
right.
so she has substance. And I think that's why he makes the excuses to pull away quickly, is because he's like, oh crap, this is more dangerous than I thought it was. I gotta leave. I gotta back out of the situation. I think Georgiana was also to the point where Georgiana comes in the room. You see the three women, how they look at Georgiana. There's Diana, who is very nervous and kind of scared. You see Mary, who is just like so sad for Georgiana. And then you see Charlotte looking at Georgiana, and she feels compassion for her, I think, instantly, but she's also analyzing how Georgiana is reacting to Sidney. And I think she's doing it twofold reasons. I think she wants to know more about Georgiana because she's drawn to people who are hurting.
Is intriguing.
Yeah. But I think also she's very interested in how Sidney receives Georgiana and how Georgiana receives Sidney, because she's trying to figure out Sidney's character.
And what their relationship is. At that point, she doesn't even know.
Yeah. I think she might have an inkling.
But, this is really the first introduction. Yeah. Because Tom hasn't really talked about, Tom doesn't know, we find out really that Sidney is her guardian.
That always confused me a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't gotten to that section of the book, or at least I don't remember seeing anything about it. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm past that. I should know, but anyway.
Because you kind of feel like he should know that that's Sidney's guardian because it's his brother and they constantly talk about things. But then in the first episode, he acts as if he has no idea, because he says to Sidney, what do you know about Miss Lamb? And he says a great deal more than I care to.
Right. Well, I think Sidney's one of those people who compartmentalizes things.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing this project for his brother. He doesn't really talk about his brother's project as much with his own business. He has his own business. And then Georgiana is another part of it. And the whole reason that they're finding out about Georgiana so much is because Georgiana's he's moved her to Sanditon to get her away from Otis and the dangers he sees in London.
So do you think it was a spur of the moment decision that he moved Georgiana to Sanditon? Because that's what confused me all the time. I thought, well, if he's moving Georgiana to Sanditon to help his brother out financially because she has money, wouldn't he tell his brother that? But it would make more sense if it was a spur of the moment.
I don't think that was the motivation. I think the motivation was to keep her away from Otis.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Because he's worried about her, getting involved with him and running off or whatever, whatever. We don't know at that point about the whole, they'll let you get married in Scotland without any permission.
Yeah. I knew about that beforehand, but that's just because I read a lot of Regency things.
Right. But in the story, we don't know that.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, going back to Sidney and Charlotte, when they're up on the balcony and he says, because it's the way he looks at her when she first comes up there and she says, beg your pardon. And he just kind of stares at her for a minute and he smiles, and it's a genuine smile. And I think he's found himself in a place he doesn't regularly find himself, where he's actually interested in this girl. And I think he usually works very hard to have zero interest in the girls that are around him. And so he answered this question in complete. I think it kind of shocks him a little bit that he asked her these questions. And then when she says what she's thinking, he smiles and he's like, and what have you found about me? And I think that was the first time he actually wanted like a favorable response, and he got one. But then he saw how much she saw truth in these people. And she brought up very, very accurate depictions of all the brothers. And that was the moment he was like, nope, okay, we're done here.
And she doesn't really say things that are disparaging about them. She really doesn't. And it's like there's too much insight here.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he's realizing she isn't this frivolous, unintelligent person.
Yep.
He's very intelligent. Yeah. And then that is even further put out there, or he realizes even more in chapter 2, in episode 2, when they're interacting.
Yeah.
And then we get to episode 3 when they join forces to help Old Stringer.
Mm-hmm.
And then he is actually able to see her as a person of substance.
Yeah. I think he always has seen her as a person of substance.
But now there's real evidence of it. I mean, she didn't shy away from helping Stringer.
Mm-hmm.
She is no ordinary woman. She's not just another one who might be interested in my money or my, whatever, my good looks. She's a person who's not afraid to dive in and take care of problems. She's not just this young, frivolous, as she says when they have their conversation after helping Old Stringer. You saw me as frivolous. And he's like, well, yes,
Mm-hmm.
And when he apologizes to her, that then says, you've made a good account of yourself today, that you've shown yourself to be I wouldn't have expected you to be so capable. He gives away a lot in those comments in terms of what he was thinking,
Mm-hmm.
what he wanted to think. I mean, I think you're right. It's not that he didn't see her as having any substance, but he didn't want to see that much.
Yeah.
Before.
Because I think that's why, I think that was the danger, is that he saw she had substance, and that's what he wanted, was a woman who is unlike those he had met already.
Right.
He didn't want another Eliza Campion. He didn't want another nobody. I mean, I think he was afraid to be with anybody at all. But if he was, the danger is that who would attract him as someone who had some modicum of substance. And I think we see that in the pineapple luncheon when he can't help but talk to her. So he's frustrated that she hit the nail on the head. And you can even see from the first ball on how he treats Tom and how he speaks to Tom. I think that's a direct influence of what Charlotte revealed to him, because it made him it forced him to see how right she actually was. Because I guarantee you, yes, I know that these are fake people. I know these are not real people. They're characters in a story. But if this character was real, I guarantee you he went back to wherever he was staying and thought about those comments all night long. And then he comes back and he treats Tom accordingly. And he treats Arthur accordingly. And you can see that in the pineapple luncheon when Arthur comes in there and Sidney goes up to him and talks to him, to Lady Denham. And then Arthur is Arthur.
Yeah.
And Sidney just kind of goes, right, and pulls him away. And so even that moment is, he's got to be thinking about what Charlotte had said to him the night before,
right?
How eccentric he is and how gregarious he is and how contrary he is. And I think that was why he used the word right there. Like, yeah, he is like this, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely.
And then when they talk at the luncheon, I think that is, he can't help it. I think that he was probably, part of him was elated that he was sitting next to her. I think there was a healthy dose of fear there too. But I think every moment he spends with Charlotte is something he craves, not just because he has this connection with her, but because it makes him feel more alive, because it forces him to look at things where I think that he avoids doing that at all costs. So with Charlotte, she brings these things that are truth. She brings these things that he should be looking at, things that he should be seeing, and he's forced to look at them.
Right. Instead of just be in the habits we have in our lives.
Yeah, exactly.
He has to take a step back.
It wakes him up.
And the meeting at the Coves is interesting,
that scene is so telling because I love how first he's like, really?
Am I never to get away from you?
And that right there is super telling, because do you think about her? Were you thinking about her before you got out of the water? Were you thinking about her at every point that you walk away? So yeah, she's already in your dreams. She's already in your thoughts constantly. And now she's here in person. So yeah, I think that's what he was saying there is, you're already everywhere except for in person. And now you're here in person when I'm trying to be alone. And so that's telling for one thing. But then when she starts to insult him, or not insult him, and say, believe me, there was every other place I would rather be than here.
You're the last person I wish to see.
Yes. Yeah. And I think he's kind of like, oh, that's a bummer. But then he knows why she's running, in that little smirk at the end as she's running away, when he realizes, so she is a little attracted to me, isn't she?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny. And so then, as you know, when we move into episode 3, and I call it the thaw. It's because they suddenly are working together and start to see each other differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we've talked a little bit about their apology to each other, and how they bring up the part about the coves, and how they neither one intended, it was totally an accident. And well then, and but then my most favorite scene, one of my most favorite scenes in the whole series, is the one where he's down at the river playing with the children, and she goes down to get them to come to tea, and they and the children involve her, were the girls involve her in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of really checks her out. This is the first time he's seen her since they were saving old Stringer. And
well, I mean, they saw each other at Lady Denham's, and then they saw each other.
No, but the injury, they take her
since
the injury.
Gotcha, since the injury.
Yeah, okay. Since the injury. And so I love that. Of course, we talked about this before when we did the recap of episode 3, but I love her line, can we not rewrite our history if we find it disagreeable?
Mm-hmm.
After he says, well, the boys have to win because they're, they have the English boat.
Yeah.
That then sinks. and the oldest daughter calls her, we will call you Admiral Heywood.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just that whole moment and the interaction and the looks between them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, is when she comes up with this idea for the regatta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the interaction between them is so warm, and how he's giving her all this credit.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they go to talk to Tom, even when Tom takes it on as his own idea.
Yeah. I love Tom.
I know. It's great. Yeah. And Mary's so wary of the whole thing. You can just see all of that.
That was the one expression I asked her about.
I know.
I had to say, I know it was 2 years ago, but she remembered. She remembered that look, sort of.
That was good. And she was like, well, she was trying to be supportive.
Yeah. I think too, that going back to a little bit further back in episode 3, the very beginning scene of episode 3 is, so when Sidney gets drunk, he does nothing but talk about Charlotte. And I think it's that moment that his friends realize, I think they're teasing because they aren't sure really what it means, because I don't think they've ever really seen Sidney with a woman. Not relationally.
In a substantial way, right?
Exactly. And so I think that they think it's hilarious that he is talking about this girl who they don't understand why, because to Charlotte, she doesn't have, or to them, Charlotte doesn't have a lot of substance, because they have never spent time with her. They've never spoken to her. She's never spoken to them. So they just see she's a young girl who is no experience and comes from not a great family. So what's the pull there? But they can see Sidney strong enough. So I think they think it's kind of a joke that he's, that it's worth teasing him about, because nothing's ever going to come of this. This is who this girl is. So it just must be something different. But that Sidney talks about her, and how I wish that they had written a scene where he talks about, like, where we actually see the drunken conversation he had with Crow and Babington about Charlotte, because I want to know if he talked about how he felt about her, or I want to know if he talked about, what he thought her looks meant. Like, Justin Young, can you please get that done? I want to hear that conversation. I want to know what he said to his friends when he had no inhibitions whatsoever.
Well, I think more than anything, he just confessed. He let down his guard enough to say that she had found him nude bathing,
I think it was more than that, though, because what Crow and Babington, they said, isn't that what you said Charlotte said when she saw you? So I think he was talking more about what actually happened rather than just disclosing that it happened.
Well, that might be, but I also think that he's guarded with everybody. He's not just guarded with women.
Oh, yeah, but not when you're drunk.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Just the fact that he even opened up.
Oh, yeah.
To talk about it at all
mm-hmm.
is a change,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we see them walk. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when leading up to Stringer's accident, when we see them come together, and he tries, I think it's that moment when he realizes after the coves that, okay, she's now I know that there's a level of connection to me that she feels. And I think that's why he starts to be almost mean to her when she keeps showing up wherever he is, because he's like, all right, I've got to put a stop to this now. This has to be over. If it goes any further, I'm in big trouble. And I think that's why he starts to be mean whenever he sees her. And then we see Dr. Fuchs come in, and he's recognizing all these things that Charlotte had said, how true they were, how accurate they were. And I think that's part of the reason he leaves early. Like, all right, I can't be in the same room with her, because you look at the expression on both of their faces. And I know we talked about this in episode 3 recap, but they zoom in on his face and then they go back and they zoom in on her face. It's the same expression. They're both like, what is happening right now? But I think the other reason he leaves early, because there's not really a reason for him to leave early. It doesn't kill him to sit there. It wouldn't hurt him. It wouldn't do anything to him if he sat there through this demonstration. But I think part of the reason he leaves is because he doesn't want to be in the same room with her, because he can't help himself around her. I think he's coming to that realization.
And all that changes when they help, then everything changes in that episode.
Yeah. The way he looks at her when she's bent over Old Stringer, I just love it.
Yeah. No, the whole, and then he really listens to her during all of that. And then after the regatta idea, when Tom says we're going on the beach, and they go to walk on the beach, and then they're walking together really for the first time together. And he says, could it be that we had each other wrong? And so
he calls her Admiral Heywood.
Yeah. And ask for her help. And he's really confessing the change in him in that moment, because he has to know that her attitude towards him or reaction is entirely based on the way he had treated her.
Oh, absolutely. He knows.
Yeah.
He worked to do that.
Yeah, he's confessing that he was wrong about her, and he, hopefully she's wrong about him.
And I think too that in that moment, it's a really sweet moment, because he's saying for the first time since Eliza, I would think, I trust you. And I'm letting you know that I trust you enough. I could have asked anybody, and I, in fact, didn't have to ask anybody. But I'm letting you partner with me in this, which is a huge deal for Sidney Parker.
It is. It definitely is. And that's what just breaks my heart about episode 4, because he's ready to be open to her. He comes back early to see her. That's the whole reason he comes back. He's excited that she might be with Georgiana, that she's living up to her word. And then he finds out that he doesn't know that Georgiana manipulated her into this, which she did.
But also Charlotte never says it. Charlotte never says, I was just trying to keep her safe.
No, because at that point she's just lashing back out at him after she gets caught mocking him. And then she has all this new information that's very negative about him in terms of Antigua and how he made his money. And, of course, the way Georgiana tells it is a way oversimplification. But
and inaccurate.
Yes, that's right. And so but it's the part that just like breaks your heart,
Yeah, I agree there. And I think that the mocking scene just seems so out of place, because even if Charlotte had this new information, I can't see her doing that to Sidney. Like that was the one thing that still a little bit I can't get behind.
So she starts off mocking Mrs. Griffith, right? And then she moves into mocking Sidney. And I think it's because she's trying to be friends with the two of them and be part of their group. You know what I mean? And so by sort of taking Georgiana and Otis's side, by mocking Sidney, that's how she's doing it. And never in a million years did she expect for him to be there and see it.
That's why it felt so out of character for me, because it's not an authentic thing. because you can see on her face when Sidney says, no, do go on. The look on her face is like, it's not just, oh crap, I'm caught. It's, oh no, what have I just done to him?
Yeah.
And you know that she feels more terrible about how he's going to feel about what she did than the fact that she was caught. And that is so out of character for Charlotte, in my opinion. I think that I know that they had to do it to bring up that conflict.
Right. But I do think that the one thing I can see it because I can see her having work, I'm sure when she's at home and she's the oldest with all the brothers and sisters, that she does things like that. I mean, imitates people and, with your brothers and sisters, there's things you do like that.
Yeah.
And so I think how it works is that it makes her a more well-rounded character. She's not perfect, and it's proven by that scene.
Yeah, that's true.
And then she lashes out at him when he, talks about how disappointed he is in her. And I should have known better than to trust you, And then she comes right back at him. And no wonder they both got so mad,
And I think that scene is really telling on multiple levels.
Yeah.
I think that when she's armed with the false information that he's a slave trade, or that he keeps slaves, that he's a slave owner is what I was trying to say. And so that has already kind of fired her up. But when he says those things to her, as she's, we see in episode 3 that she feels something for him very clearly. It's the first time that we actually see that she's allowing herself to alter her opinions on him. And she's willing to give him more of herself, that she's willing to let him in a little bit more. And so when he says, I should have known better to trust you, then she's so hurt, and hurt people. And so her instinct is just, you know what? Fine, I'm going to hit you back. I wasn't going to do it, but now I'm going to hit you back. And the heartbreaking moment for me is when he almost breathless says, you speak out of turn. Mm-hmm. That's the part that always just kind of is like a knife to the heart for me, because he seems so overwhelmed with sadness in that moment at how little she must think of him to think he does this horrible, horrible thing.
Right. Yeah.
And all the things he thought she felt for him, he's got to assume were just false.
Yeah. It's such a sad moment. And then of course she walks with Stringer. Even in spite of how angry he is at her and how misguided her information is, well, both of them, they're both, if they really both of them understood what was going on, they wouldn't have been so angry with each other. But
she did exactly what he asked her to do.
Right. And Sidney does, but even then, even as he's yelling at her and mad at her, he asks Stringer to walk her home.
Yeah.
He's still a gentleman about it. And
he still desires protecting her.
That's right. And then it's so interesting to me when they cross paths back in the Trafalgar house, that, they stop at the stairs and they're very cold with each other. Did you notice that Charlotte, for one of the few times, has her hair up?
Yep.
That tells you a lot right there. And then that's when Charlotte decides that she's going to help Georgiana, and she goes and says he's self-important, prejudiced, and cruel. Well, none of that's really true, but that's her view of it at that point.
Think part of it is because he didn't deny when they were arguing, but what was the point? And I think Sidney saw that. I think he thought to himself, well, it doesn't matter if I deny this. You're already set in your opinions, and you're not going to alter it if I deny.
Right. And he also says, I don't have to explain myself to you. Mm-hmm. It's probably the first person that he has even had somebody challenge him in for a long time.
But I think that statement was more of a realization that I think he felt in that moment that she'll take anybody else's word than his. So I think him saying, I don't have to explain myself to you, was him trying to put back on that strong exterior, that armor. I don't think he actually felt that way at all. I think he felt, there's nothing I can say here because you clearly value other people more than me. So I'm not going to explain anything to you. I'm not going to stoop to that level.
Right. And he's not even open to trying to understand what she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's made
Because
worse.
he walked in on her mocking him, though.
Right. I
That's
know.
why.
Well, I mean, what would anybody think? You know, it was, yeah, she was trying too much to be a friend to the two of them instead of the responsible adult,
Yeah.
as it were.
And I think if she could have actually like really taken herself out of that moment and looked at Sidney when they saw each other back at Trafalgar House, Sidney didn't look angry. He didn't look furious. He looked kind of devastated. He looked really down when because he just took a deep sigh and he quietly said, Miss Heywood. And that was it. He wasn't, the fight had gone out of him because he was just, I think he was mad at himself. So he was internalizing it because, well, I did it again. I let her in. I trusted someone and look at what happened again. And I don't think he was mad at her. I think he was mad at himself for letting her in. And he was devastated at the loss of that, what he thought was the loss of that connection.
Yep, that's right. And then, but he still can't take his eyes off of her, as we see at the cricket match.
Because he still deeply cares for her.
Oh yeah, he is. And his line about never short of assumptions and yet more assumptions. He says that, you know, the never short of assumptions is when she says, oh, you're here for the cricket, I assume, you know, and then again at the cricket. But he's been watching her all this time with Stringer and what she's saying to Stringer. And then she sort of feels like she has to tell him good luck.
Yeah. And I think that in episode 6, when he says, I've underestimated you, and that's what he's apologizing for, I think that goes back to episode 5 when he's the assumptions thing, because she's obviously right. It's not an assumption. That is why he's there. The only assumption is that, and I don't think it would have always been an assumption, but when she says, though I imagine you don't think you'll need it, that was Sidney pre-Charlotte.
Yes.
He wouldn't have thought. So him saying the assumption thing is just a way to kind of take an unjustified dig at her because she's right. And he knows she's right. And he wants her to think, you don't know me at all. Look at how naive and little you are. His words are designed to hurt. And I think if we go back to the cricket match, one of my favorite looks, and it took me a few times watching it to see this, but I mean, obviously there's the when she's trying to get away from him before he comes there and she goes to Georgiana and you see him in the background watching her. And then there's I posted something on Twitter a while ago that everyone talks about the smolder of the dance scene in episode 6. But I think there's way more smolder in the way he looks at Charlotte right after they greet Reverend Hankins in the cricket match. When he's just kind of staring over the top of his eyes at her, she walks away. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh.
It was their first, like when they're close to each other and she kind of gives him a look as she's walking away, like, what are you doing? But my favorite look is when she's talking to Stringer and she says, you have admirers already. And he says, I hope you're one of them. And you see in the background, Sidney, like trying discreetly to just watch them. And it's my favorite Sidney expression because you can almost see the pain of, I'm not him. And then when she comes over, he hastily tries to look away anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. No, that's right. And also, have you noticed that they're so skillful in the way they've edited this and put this together, because he is the bowler. I think they call it when he's pitching. I would call it pitching the ball. The first 2 times he gives up hits, gives up scores. And both times he's looked at her before he threw the ball. And then, you know, the next time when he gets the out, he's not looking at her. You know, she's distracting, obviously.
And it's also telling when Stringer is the bowler and Sidney and Charlotte are out on the field and Stringer gives her the smile and Sidney's just kind of watching him as she smiles at her. And the expression on Sidney's face is very telling of exactly how he feels about Charlotte and Stringer.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I love too, when after Georgiana's gone and they go back, you see him in Mrs. Griffith's and Charlotte appears in there. He does not hesitate before he just unloads on her all of his fears. There's zero hesitation there. And I think that just like when they were on the beach in episode 3 and he says, you know, I want you to partner with me in this. I trust you. I think that he's in that moment of fear, he goes right back to what he knows in his gut is true, that she is worth trusting and that she is able to partner with him and she's able to match him. And so he just unloads all of his emotional fears to Charlotte right away. And I think that is such a sweet moment that he does it. Of course, it's ruined in a few minutes by saying, hey, by the way, it was me. But still,
say that again. It's ruined when he says what?
When she says, oh, by the way, it was me. I'm the one who helped her do this.
Right, right.
That he kind of like every time he gives himself, he's like, oh, why did you do that? So it's like
it was interesting in the Q&A. Lisa Clark talked about they redid that scene about 5 times.
Oh, really?
Trying to get it right. And like the level of anger, the how they played the scene. So, and I wrote to her at that time, well, you did it perfectly, because it is, I mean, he's angry, but he holds it in a lot, and when he says, you forgot, and yeah, I mean, it's so well done. That scene is just perfect, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is, because I think it runs the whole gamut of emotions. There's, and that connection is solidified a little more, because it's not just that Sidney unloads on her and trusts her to give her all his emotional fear, but in the end, Charlotte realizes just what I think she underestimated just how much of this burden of Georgiana that Sidney carries. And it was that moment that she realized he's not what Georgiana has says he is. He's not the impression that they've given me. He genuinely cares for her and wants her safety. And what have I done? How I betrayed this man. What have I done?
Right. And and just the reality hits Charlotte about how her actions have really put her in danger, and in a way that she probably never could have conceived of before this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's, then we move into episode 6, and I'm going to try and do this quickly, although this is my absolute favorite episode. So we'll talk about it later when we get into the whole episode, but that she has the courage to get on the coach. We talked about that when we talked about her, and then thankfully they meet up right away, and he rescues her from that assault that's taking place. I mean, it's really an assault, and she but she is so determined to try and make things right. She keeps bringing that up with him, and the whole conversation in the coach, when they're back and forth, and at many points in that conversation, he's not ready to give up, but he is very, very frustrated. And
rightly so.
Right. And her desire and determination, incredible determination to find Georgiana, keeps her thinking logically all along the way. I mean, they battle it out on in the coach in terms of their conversations and really finding out who each other are and how they feel about each other. But it is, as we have talked about a little bit before, it's her logic that keeps him moving forward. I mean, he's so mad at Otis. I mean, it's her knowledge that takes him to the Sons of Norway. Not the Sons of Norway.
Sons of Africa.
The Sons of Africa. And it's the fact that she realizes that he didn't get the post. I mean, he says, why would somebody steal your post? That leaves our Otis to figure out that it must be his debt that's caused the problem.
Yeah.
And then Sidney's anger at Otis over the debt, but she says, well, he doesn't sound like a gentleman who would give up without having payment. And that's what moves them the next step forward.
Yeah. But I think there's even a more telling scene of where they stand together. And that's when he has Otis up against a wall.
Oh, yes.
And he says, I should end you right here and now. And the way it's framed, you can only tell by knowing where she's standing before they cut back to Sidney, because his eyes are over this way, which is right where Charlotte is standing. So she knows enough to get in his eye line and say, what good will it do? Listen to me, focus on me. And Charlotte is the only one who can bring Sidney down in that moment, I think.
Yes.
Because of the connection that they are both starting to recognize that they have. And even though they're fighting it, I think they're both fighting it at this point, because I think that they're both like, well, there's no way we're going to work, but there's that connection is still there. And as much as he wanted to protect her from that assault, and I love even them when they're walking back to the carriage and that guy just innocently stumbles by and Sidney grabs him by the shoulder and says, "Excuse me." I just still protecting Charlotte. I love that scene. It makes me laugh out loud every time I see that, because that guy was completely innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. He just got thrown just for nothing. But as much as he is protecting her, Charlotte's instinct is always like it wasn't so much about protecting Otis in that moment. It was protecting Sidney from himself. And so she also, because there is that connection, because there's genuine feelings and genuine emotion, and they're really becoming, even though they're at odds, they're beginning to love each other very deeply in a way that is lasting, that her instinct is to protect Sidney from himself. So she gets in his eye line and says, "Focus on me and take a breath and step away." And he actually does. He closes his eyes and he takes a breath and he lets him go. And I think that is one of the most telling things in that episode of where they stand with each other.
Because he's listening to her. He's learning to listen to her.
And she knows it, because she knows all she has to do is get in his eye line.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, the whole interaction there is so wonderful. And
but I mean, that right there, it just says that, yes, we talk about how Sidney watches her. She has to be watching him too. Right. And we can kind of see that in those little glimpses. Like there was in an earlier episode, I think it was episode 2, where they pass each other. She's coming back from swimming and he's going to Trafalgar House, or leaving Trafalgar House. And she watches him out of the corner of her eye. And then but we forget that because we're so consumed with how Sidney watches her all the time. We forget to watch those little moments where Charlotte's eyes are on him. And she's reading him and she's watching him. She's observing him because she is falling in love with him. And so we can see just how much she has watched him and observed him to know that that's what she needs. That's all she has to do to get Sidney to listen to her. And she knows he will. I don't think there's any doubt that he'll listen to her, but she speaks quietly. She speaks certainly, and he listens.
Yes. Yeah. So then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because what is really important, I think, is the interaction between them both when she's apologizing to him after they get back. They're in their house. They're in
6.
Yeah. And when she is trying to apologize to him for the way the assumption she'd made about his prejudice and all that. And he says, "I'm not accepting her apology," that he realizes he's underestimated her. I mean, he's been really affected by this whole event in a very large way. And obviously she is too. And then when they're at the ball and he says, "Don't ever doubt yourself. You're equal to any woman here." I mean, those are
more than equal to anyone here.
More than equal, right? And just the emotion in his eyes towards her in those moments is pretty amazing. And
it's one of the few times I'm actually mad at Tom.
What's that?
It's one of the few times I actually get mad at Tom.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? In that moment, really, Tom?
Yeah. It's just, and also how she figures out really how she's feeling about him based on her conversation with Babington, and her conversation with Lady Susan.
Yep.
Really. And then they have the incredible dance that will live in infamy. I think it's the best dance ever in any film I've ever seen. And and
watch all the different emotions play out on their faces. From first, it starts off as a deep desire, like you can just see it on both of their faces that it's not lost on them what touch means. Right. And before they even begin, there's such an anticipation and there's such a desire to be able to hold her and for her to be able to put her hands on him, that even though it's just a dance, they understand the depth of the meaning behind that touch for them, because they understand for the first time, because Sidney has always kind of known it, but he's refused to acknowledge it. He's finally acknowledging it, finally allowing it to the surface. And she, for the first time, is aware. So they both understand so deeply what this touch is about to mean. And there's no verbal in that dance at all, none whatsoever.
Right.
And so you see it start off that way. And then you see that their connection is almost intensified by this dance. And you see her confusion at first. And it's almost like the look on his face is reassuring her. No, this is good. This is going to be good. And then once they both just give themselves over to it, the joy, the pure joy that's on their face as they go into that dance. And do you notice that is the moment, the very first time that Sidney begins to smile, Eliza Campion walks in the background. Like,
yep.
Really? Because I actually went back and I started watching. When does she come in? She came in right when he was joyful. And then she's like, I'm going to take that.
Yeah. It's, we're this series, they take us up and take us down.
I know. And now we're not permanently down. We're going to come back from this.
Yes, we do.
But talking Sidney and Charlotte makes you feel like you're going to be permanently down.
Yeah. And then of course, in episode 7, all the interaction, on the boat, when they're rowing, which is an incredible scene as well. And the acting between these two is amazing.
Yeah.
And and that's one of the reasons why they cannot recast Sidney. Because I'm sorry, you cannot replace that.
No.
You just can't replace that.
No.
And Davies understands that, as well as the rest of the producers and everything. I mean, they know it. And so and then when they have their, interaction with Lady Susan and Eliza, and then he chases after her to try and smooth things over. And she says, what is it you want of me? And he is speechless because he hasn't been able to put into words what he wants.
Yep. And
so then eventually, when they are back together, when he comes by to find her at the house, and she's like, oh, I thought you'd be gone with Mrs. Campion. And he's like, well, she's left already. I chose not to join him. I realized that I want to be here with you. Well, he didn't say with you, but he says, I prefer to be here, which is a huge change. He kept trying to get out of Sanditon.
Yeah.
In episode 5, he said he wasn't going to be back to Sanditon. And so, yeah, the interaction is amazing. And then y'all let you say the words he says.
I do want to say it, but I want to jump back a bit to their interaction right after Eliza, because when she says, now I know that you really think, she asked him a question. Is that all I am to you? And he says, no, of course not. And then he stops.
Yes. Right.
So he was going to say, no, you're more than that.
You're much more than that.
Yeah. Is what I assume is going to come out of his mouth. But there's a pain in his face. And again, this is another reason they cannot recast Sidney, because Theo James masterfully depicts Sidney Parker's emotions. And I don't think, because we've seen him as Theo or as Sidney, there is no way anybody else can do what Theo James did with that character. And I've said this on our Facebook group, and people are saying there's good actors out there just as good as Theo. There are, you're right. But Theo James has become Sidney Parker because he gave himself fully over to that character. And in that moment, when he says, no, of course not, you're more, there is such a deep pain etched on his face when he stops his words. Because you know that he desperately wants to tell her that, but he just feels so afraid and he feels so trapped. And I think in that moment, not only does he hate that he feels so trapped and afraid, but he hates that it's destroying the person who he has come to realize how much he loves her.
Yeah, that he's hurting her in that process. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's also, I think the other reason he stops is because there's also a desperate sadness to, I think he feels she's better off without me. I'm trash. And I really think that he feels that in that moment, until I think it's might be Stringer who puts him into action. This is not the prize I was after. And you see Sidney think about it for a minute. But we talked about earlier, Sidney's not an idiot. he's no dummy. So I think it might have taken him a minute, but he understands, you're right, she is a prize. And I have her, don't I? And so when he tells her, I find that, I don't remember how he starts, but he says, I'm my truest self, my best self when I'm with you.
Right.
It's such an accurate depiction of both of them. And at first, the first time I saw it, I was like, well, couldn't you pick more romantic lines? Like, yeah, it's sweet and it's descriptive, but couldn't you have said, I love you? Couldn't you have confessed how much you feel for her? But I think for Sidney, that was more a confession than I love you.
Yes.
Saying that.
Yeah. And it carries more meaning, really. I mean,
absolutely.
Because people toss around I love you pretty easily sometimes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's it's just an amazing performance by both of them. Mm-hmm. And the interview that they did about the dance, you know, they talked about that was really their favorite scene. Both of them said that. And because it's how it's choreographed and where you are emotionally and the music. Mm-hmm. And I just hope since we're getting that music person back and the choreographer back, the composer and the choreographer back, hopefully we'll see some more. I don't think they'll achieve that again, but something similar.
Yeah. I think they'll do great.
Yeah.
Ruth Barrett is a master.
Yeah, definitely.
I love what she did with the music, with the scores in this movie. It's phenomenal. I love it.
It is. I mean, it is really amazing. Mm-hmm. So let's wrap it up with episode 8, much as we might like not to, right? Well, I mean, there's the first half of it is just wonderful. Mm-hmm. You know, they go for a walk and they have the wonderful kiss up on the cliff tops. And
well, even before that, with Sidney, with him being almost like a schoolboy, you know, very hesitant, very soft. He's very muted in caring for her. Like even when he says, you know, I was walking to town and wondering if there's anything I might get for you. And it's just, he's very soft in that moment. He's just softened. And that's not what you see in Sidney throughout the entire series.
No, and she is very responsive, obviously, to it.
And even when they're walking up on the cliffs, I love watching his arm as they're walking, the arm that's right behind her back, because there's a couple times when like he's gone to put it around her and then he pulls it back and he makes like a fist, and then he's done that a couple times. And I think that too is really sweet, where it's not like it's not like a sexual thing at all. It's just a desire to be close to her and a desire to just know that she's his. And I think that's his. I don't think until that kiss, he's really certain that she's his.
Right. Yeah. And she doesn't either, you know.
Absolutely.
I mean, she's been pretty upset with him. And then he comes and says, you know, that I'm my best self with you. And then obviously all she does is think about that all night. Obviously it's all that both of them think about that. And so, yeah, it's when they have the kiss that their relationship is cemented, as it were. And then as they're preparing for the ball, and you know, and then of course it's so heartbreaking that they don't actually dance together in that ball. You know,
it's another Mary Parker. Kate, I love you, but I just
well, Tom is the first one to intercept them, then Mary, then Stringer. You know,
well, to be fair, Stringer didn't intercept Charlotte or Sidney. Mary, he had already done that for him, so he took his opportunity.
Well, right, you know, but he took advantage of it. I mean, and then but then we get to the balcony and are having this wonderful moment that gets totally interrupted by Edward's arrival.
I love to, because this is exactly what Sidney needs. Because Sidney is not a bad guy. Sidney has just been self-imposed exile emotionally. He's been afraid. He's been self-loathing. He has been truly, truly unhappy because he just feels the pain that the world has to offer rather than seeing it through Charlotte's eyes. And I think that's one of the things that helps him come out of that is Charlotte doesn't see the pain in the world. She sees all the things that could happen. And you see that even on the beach when she's talking with Esther. And Esther says, look at the sea. Doesn't it all seem so dreary?
Right.
And where Esther sees a cage, Charlotte sees freedom. And it's the same thing with Sidney. With the world, Sidney just sees all the pain it has to offer, but Charlotte sees all the benefits the world can give you. And she begins to open that up on him. So when he says, I hope I'm a different man now, she says, no, you're not a different man. You're a better man.
Much improved.
Yes. Yeah. And so he's just opened himself up in such a beautiful way to her.
Yes. And she brings joy,
you
know,
because she sees who he is and she validates that he's worth loving. And that's what Charlotte is really good at doing, is validating everyone's worth without even trying.
Yeah. It just comes naturally to her.
And she's a woman who's worth impressing. She's a woman who's worth putting time and effort into. And if she values you, that's a huge thing. And I think Sidney recognizes that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in the whole fire happens. They both are people of action. He jumps in and starts trying to help put out the fire. As soon as he's able to, she shows up and starts getting the men organized. And then the next time we see them together is when they're talking with Lady D and telling her, you know, what's happened. And again, Charlotte is bringing reason to that conversation, and Sidney is bringing action. He's the one who's going to save the day.
Why did he say a week? Couldn't you have said a month? I mean, a week is a long time to come up with that much money, or not a long time to come up with that much money.
Right. But, you know, it was what it was.
I mean, it was written that way for a reason. They had an ending in mind.
Yeah, especially when they found out they weren't being renewed. This is very intentional on Davy's part.
Yes.
And he masterfully hooked us in. And so the scene on the street, of course, we like the deleted version better when he kisses her. But
I don't know. I think I like the one they left in a little better. It's more accurate.
It is more accurate. That's why they left it in. But I'm glad they released the one they deleted.
Exactly. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. I do enjoy the deleted scene. I just prefer the one they left in.
And then when he returns with the news that Sanditon is saved, but the two of them are lost, is the emotion in that scene is amazing.
Yeah.
And when they return, he comes and stops the carriage, there's this part of me that wishes he didn't. But, you know, because there's this, you can see in her eyes the faintest amount of hope.
Yeah. She thinks he's coming to say, hey, I'm going to be with you.
I don't know that she thinks that. I think that there is just the glimmer of hope that could be the case.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what she hopes that is going to happen.
But she's, you know, anyway, obviously that isn't the case. And he's still, what a strong woman she is, that even when he says, I don't love her, he still says the right thing.
Part of me wishes she didn't.
Yeah. Well,
part of me wishes she would, especially knowing what I know now that he's not coming back.
Yeah.
Part of me wishes she just said, you know, I love you too, but we have to, you've made this commitment. Like, couldn't you have said that you loved him too? Just give him a little bit of hope that if he leaves her, you're still there.
Well,
I understand why it happened the way it did.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, and that classic look of him as she's pulling away. And, yeah.
It's painful to watch that part.
It is very painful. So we're ready for season 2, so that the Sanditon can recover a little.
I think too that if we jump back to the ball scene real quick, when they're talking in the balcony, he didn't have any obligation to go down and handle Edward. But that's who Sidney is.
I understand what you mean, but that's right. That is who Sidney is. He would always be the one. He's the one who helped put out the fire. He was manning the hose. You know,
Tom was nowhere in any of those situations. You actually see Tom in the Edward situation running around in the background. he was not there. And I think Tom knew, okay, my brother is not going to handle this. So I have to do what Charlotte said and help my brother, even if I don't want to. I've got to go do it. And he goes to help him. And even I love too when he's bringing back the hose thing, he looks at Charlotte as he's going past her, and you can tell that there's almost like the sense of dread on his face as he looks at Charlotte, and she's immobilized just for a minute after he looks at her, and then she's like, all right, let's go, form a line. So I just like that they showed those character traits in both of them. But then when right before he tells her, because I try to watch that scene where they found out he's going to marry Eliza, I try to watch his expression and the expressions around them. So I rewinded a bunch of times, and just how his whole body, and this is where Theo James is great at this role, is it's not just his words, it's not just the tone of his voice. He puts everything in his body into this. And in the moment his family leaves him, you see his whole body kind of just like fall before he has to go do this unspeakably painful thing to the woman that he loves and cares about more than anybody else. And the expression, and even how his voice how it wavers a little bit.
Right.
And there's almost like a tremble to him when he tells her that he's obliged to be engaged to her. And you know that as she leaves, he wants to follow her, but he cannot. He can't. And I think that was his struggle on stopping the carriage too, is the same reason why he didn't go after her in that moment, because he knew that if he went after her, then he wouldn't be able to go through with marrying Eliza. That would be it if he went after her.
And his family would be ruined.
Mm-hmm. And then even at the wedding, this scene I think is really, really telling. And this is why I don't want this whole wedding scene is the reason why, because people are like, well, he's just using Eliza the way that Otis was going to use Georgiana. Or I also hear a lot of, well, she doesn't know what she's doing. No, Eliza absolutely knows what's happening, because in the scene when Sidney goes up to Charlotte, and I love that Lady Denham did that. Part of me wants to know what her goal was when she did that, because there was a reason she picked Sidney out particularly to come talk to Charlotte. Obviously, yes, I know they're fake characters, but still, there is a reason the writers wrote it that way. And I'd like to know if there was a motivation other than just bringing Sidney and Charlotte back together again. But when he goes up there and talks to her, he has to be surface level, and you could tell it kills him, because Charlotte is the only person in the world that Sidney can go deeper with, and he's not allowed to do it. And I think it kills him, and Charlotte feels the exact same way. But when Eliza comes over and she's exerting her dominance over Charlotte, Sidney is he's pissed. And he won't acknowledge that Eliza's there. He won't respond to any of her questioning. He won't do anything. And he does that jaw tick that I love that Theo James put into there, that just shows his supreme frustration and irritation with Eliza. And you can tell by the expression on Eliza's face, she knows exactly what she's doing. Because it's that moment that she's saying, I'm your boss. You'll do what I say, and you won't disagree with my methods.
Right.
And that's what's happening.
I think she was really dominating him, not so much.
Exactly. Charlotte. Yeah. I'm your boss, and you'll do what I say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, they are incredible actors, the two of them, I mean, the whole group, the whole ensemble is incredible. As, I think it was Chris Marshall, when he was interviewed, he said, these people really inhabit their characters.
Yeah.
And it's so true. I mean, it's amazing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also the reason why, as I've said before, that the actors and Theo James will never see this show the way we do.
Yeah.
Because they know when the camera went off who they are, and that's part of their memory. We don't have that memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
So that's why people are like, how can he separate himself from this show? Well, that's why. I mean, it was a job.
And if he didn't, I mean, Theo James and Ruth Kearney are great actors. And you can tell that by the fact that you get the idea that they genuinely don't like each other. But obviously that's not true, because they're married in real life. They've got to like each other at least a little bit.
Yeah.
So if they didn't separate themselves from the show, what would that mean for their marriage? That would be terrible. That'd be a terrible union. So the fact that they can portray obviously Eliza's infatuated with him, but I don't think when you're watching this show and you're feeling the emotions that they feel, you don't feel that Eliza can't be in love with Sidney Parker. You feel that she wants him, but it's almost like it's more about winning him than it is about anything else. And you really genuinely feel that Sidney Parker cannot stand Eliza Campion in any way by the end. And that's obviously not true of the actors.
No, of the people.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And it's, I read an interview where he talked about the fact that one of the reasons that it really worked with him and his wife is because they're both actors and they understand it's acting.
Yeah.
Which it has got to be hard for somebody who's married to an actor. Who isn't an actor, who isn't themselves an actor. Yeah, they're both really incredible. And I look forward to, they just can't produce more work fast enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, it's quite the job they did in the show. And that's why we love it so much.
Exactly. And before Theo James said, no, I'm not coming back, my idea for what would happen, because Sidney or Theo and Rose did such a great job, not only portraying their characters, but pouring a solid foundation for their relationship going forward. They did such a great job making that foundation firm and making it long-standing, that my whole goal for the coming seasons was that somehow, whether it's through Lady Susan or Babington, they were going to save the day. Sidney was going to be able to leave Eliza, whether they offered Eliza something in return or not. Eliza would have to be the one to break it off, but Sidney would be able to come back and be welcomed back into the fold by Charlotte, by, work. I think he would have some work to do because, he basically left her for someone else. So there still would have to be some work to do there, but they were endgame for me. Obviously now they're not, so we have to readjust, but they were endgame for me.
Well, of course. I mean, I don't think anybody could have watched that show and said, well, I don't care what happens to Charlotte and Sidney. Of course, that's what you cared about.
I know more people than I would think who are Team Stringlot.
Right, but that's
Sidney's not coming back
because of how it ended. Then they could really see
her. No, like even before Theo James said he wasn't coming back, they were like, Sidney's wrong for her. He shouldn't be with her. She should be with
James. What I mean, after the show ended.
Yeah.
After they were broken up, then okay, great. Then she'll be with Stringer, but I don't think he's even coming back to the show.
I don't think so either.
So
he hasn't said anything yet.
No. Yeah. And I still maintain, had the series continued right then, that Theo would have come back a lot, and so would Ruth, if it had been confirmed right away.
Yeah.
But because I'm sure their contract said that, but once ITV broke the contract, then they were no longer obligated.
I mean, it was 2 years out.
Yeah. A lot of water under the bridge. And let's face it, we're not done going through a pandemic. We've been going through a pandemic. If there's nothing else that happens during this period of time, is it gives people pause to think about what they want to do with their lives.
Yeah.
And just playing the same character is not that fulfilling for an actor.
Yeah. And I mean, Theo James he likes to play different things. And as he said during our Theo James Appreciation Day, he had said, I posted an interview where he was talking about social media, and he had said that one of the reasons he doesn't go on there is because he wants people to see him as the characters he portrays and not himself. But that also means that he has to give over an awful lot of himself to be that character,
which he obviously does.
Exactly. And that's why no one else can be Theo or can be Sidney Parker. But stepping out of that role for 2 years and having other roles in the meantime, I imagine it would be pretty difficult for him to get back into that headspace of that character. I mean, he's a good actor. He could do it, but is it worth it for him?
And, and obviously it's not what he wanted to do.
Exactly. And he can make I don't know why everyone thinks that we make the decisions for him. Like he's a grown man. He can make it. We don't know why he's making the decisions, and we don't have to, but who's to say he's not making the decision for the betterment of his family? Like, really? Are we not important than that? Like,
none of those people who are saying that are having their decisions made by Theo James.
Exactly. That's a good point. So I think that now what I would like to see, because obviously, if there was any chance at all, I still want Sidney and Charlotte. That is my preferred storyline. It was what I would like to see. But since it does not look like there's any possibility, even remotely, there's not even a glimmer of hope, Theo James shut that right down on all of us. See, now people are upset at how he left the show. I think it was a little rude, his announcement. I think it was a little, not rude, but insensitive to the fandom. But if he had responded any other way, there would have been hope that he was coming back.
No, that's right.
So I think that, yes, it was pretty insensitive to the fandom, but it also shut down any glimmer of hope of him returning, because people are like, well, maybe he'll make a cameo. Maybe he'll come back in season 3. But then when he put out that announcement, we're like, oh, wow. So he's really never coming back. So I think he had to be that way. But now that we know he's not coming back, my hope for Charlotte and Sidney is that there is a kind resolution, and a way that they can both be apart happily for both of them. So I hope they resolve it that way for both.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yep. I love them together, but life isn't always fair.
Exactly.
That's exactly. And people are going to have to accept it whether they like it or not.
Theo James teaching us life lessons right there.
Yep, that's right. And I'm sure that there was a negotiation between him and PBS and, the production crew about how the announcement was made and what was said. I'm sure it was a joint decision.
Yeah, I'm sure. But it's easier to have a scapegoat. It's easier to have someone to be mad at than actually look at it logically.
Yeah, definitely.
Theo James, if you ever watch this, which I doubt you do, we love you.
Oh, absolutely. Really look forward to seeing him in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever whatever character he chooses to inhabit.
He's a great actor. I'm not going to boycott him because he's no longer Sidney Parker.
Exactly.
I like the stuff he does.
Yep.
And Ruth, if you're watching this, we're okay with you coming back. Maybe you can be, maybe Eliza can be reformed. I kind of hope, what my original hope was that Edward would be the one to pull Eliza away from Sidney, and Edward and Eliza would be together. That was originally what I wanted to see happen.
That's quite the scenario. Yeah.
So if that can it all be done, let's do that.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing what Ruth does too with her acting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So next week is going to be a recap of episode 4 because we've done our 4 rounds. So we'll be diving into Janice's absolute favorite episode next week. And we'll be talking Jedediah James. And I'm excited because that's the only episode we see him in, but I hope he comes back. Well, we see him in 6.
Jedediah James.
Not Jedediah. Oh my gosh. How do you pronounce his first name? He's Otis.
Oh, yeah.
Not Jedediah.
I don't know.
But it's like Jyudah, I think.
Yeah. I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
But
haven't heard about him if he's coming back or not.
I think they tidied him up, so I think he could go either way because he's in the Navy, so they could very easily be done with his character. Back. But he could also. But
it'll be interesting to see what they do with her.
Yeah, and I think they put his character in a way that he could or couldn't come back without problem.
Yep.
So
and it may be that they just don't want to announce all of the people who are coming back.
I kind of like the trickle effect.
Yeah.
Because like in our Facebook group, it gives me the opportunity to be like, hey, guess what? This person's coming back now. And then we can do like the appreciation post for them. So I kind of like that we get to help announce the characters coming back. Although everyone is on the Sanditon Sisterhood page, so they all know. But still, I like that.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so we will see you guys next week for our recap of episode 4. Enjoy.
Sounds wonderful.
Let us know if you like this episode. What do you think about Sidney and Charlotte? But try to be unbiased from the Theo James announcements. Just stick to the characters. What do you think of the characters and the relationship? Are we right? Are we wrong? And if you want to be on the show, if you want to co-host an episode with me, like my pal Janice here, who is going to, I think you're going to be a fairly regular co-host because we enjoy this. We like talking Sanditon together.
Yeah.
But reach out to us. We have the Sanditon Chronicles at gmail.com. We have our Facebook group, the Sanditon Chronicles, Sanditon Family Fan Club. All those links will be in the podcast description. So reach out. And I appreciate all you who reached out to our email and thanked us for the show and told us how you felt about the show. I read all those emails, and I really appreciate you guys reaching out and encouraging our team to keep doing this.
And the new members.
Yes, exactly. We are up to 800 members now. Let's keep it growing, because the more people I can get in the group, the more really what we need is the more people we can get watching this podcast, the better content I can bring you with the podcast. And I'm going to leave that to you to think of what I mean on that. But the more viewers we get, the better opportunities we have to give you. So keep sharing. What's that?
More doors open.
Yes, exactly. More doors open.
When more viewers, the more doors open.
Yep. So keep subscribing, liking, and rating. If you're on iTunes, rate us. If you're on Amazon Music, rate us. Give us good ratings, and we'll keep it going for you. So that's it for this week. We'll see you next week, guys. Bye.